attendance here to defend my colleague Stephen Donnelly to host two former British Prime Ministers, or Deputy Prime Ministers, should I say? Nearly there, nearly. But Lord Nick or Sir Nick Clegg, Lord Michael Heseltine and Lord Andrew Adonis, who are in Dublin as part of their reaching out to other EU states and trying to do their best to reduce the harm that Brexit may do to both the UK, to Ireland and the EU. So we've had a series of excellent meetings with them today. I'm going to ask Sir Nick to open up, to give a statement. He'll be followed by Lord Heseltine and then Lord Adonis, and then after that we'll take questions, if that's okay. So, Sir Nick.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you very much for all of you for coming here, and sorry we're a tiny bit late. We're really here to take your questions, so we'll keep it brief. But just to recap, why are we here? We're here to try and understand better for ourselves quite what is at stake in seeking to resolve what now remains as by far the most important outstanding issue in the Brexit talks, which is the future of the border, both between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but also the east-west border between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. It is worth recalling that those who advocated Brexit in the summer of 2016, Nigel Farage, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson and others, urged millions of voters to vote for Brexit because in doing so, at least they claimed, people will be able to take back control of British borders. Subsequent to that decision being taken in the referendum, of course, a new border was created, which didn't exist before, a land border between the United Kingdom and the EU. And now, somewhat ironically, those very same people are falling over themselves to say they don't want to control the border, which their cause has helped to create in the first place. And we remain as perplexed as anyone else does about exactly how they're going to navigate this fundamental conundrum of creating a border but not wanting to police a border. And it has been very helpful for us to understand the political, the social, potentially, unfortunately, even the security and most certainly the economic consequences of disruption and controls being introduced at those borders. Michael, Andrew and I come from different political parties, different political traditions, but we are all united in a fervent belief that Brexit is not only being mishandled at the moment, but is also strategically a once-in-a-generation mistake of huge proportions for the United Kingdom, and also will weaken the European Union as well. After this visit, we will go back to London really with a strong message to the government that they can't duck this issue any longer. They can't avoid confronting the consequence of their own contradictions any longer. This is clearly now going to come to a head in the EU summit in June. And we, particularly after the meetings we've had this morning, have a great deal of sympathy with businesses, with the public, and with the Irish political class becoming increasingly exasperated and impatient with the lack of proposals and answers emanating from the UK government. Michael.
Well, I echo what Nick has said. There is no substitute for actually visiting and listening and talking to people who have a different point of view to your own. It's been very illuminating and enlightening to have that experience here today. I first joined a British government in 1970, and in a range of different positions, I have sat without being personally immediately involved and listened to the agonizing of my ministerial colleagues wrestling with the difficulties of the Irish question. I have, again, of course, therefore lived through the traumas, the horrors, the antagonies that have taken place. And one of the most impressive and exciting changes in my life has been the improved relationships that now are accepted and much welcomed in Ireland. Personally, of course, I am deeply preoccupied by the effects for my country of leaving the European Union. I was first inspired by the speeches of Winston Churchill, and of course I remember the war. So the whole experience of the European movement is ingrained in my whole political life. Now, why all that brings me here to Dublin today is because I see this issue of Brexit leaving unanswered the questions of the border and its many potential forms. But behind that, I see the process of bringing peace to Ireland, which has had such an extraordinary beneficial transformation. And I'm extremely worried that the issue of the border is simply being kicked down the time zone. Nobody has a serious answer to the questions. Nobody has a solution that stands up to any sort of examination. And therefore the easy thing for politicians is to have a few phrases and say, yes, we'll sort that tomorrow. But the tomorrow is running out of time. And so I am preoccupied that what we're doing, little by little, is moving towards the reintroduction of borders. And I know that whatever the politicians say, borders need to be policed. And I know that the only way you can police borders in a modern society is with armed policemen. I think that would be a tragedy beyond price for Ireland and for the United Kingdom. And yet the issue is being ducked, avoided, put off. This is unacceptable. And coming here today and listening, my anxieties have found echo here in Dublin, as I know they do widely in the United Kingdom.
Thanks very much, Michael. Andrew?
Thank you. I agree with everything that Nick and Michael have said. Just 3 quick points before we take your questions. The first is Brexit is not a done deal. To an extent that I don't think is realised outside Britain, there is a massive debate taking place in Britain. There's another year to go before we leave the European Union. Theresa May will not submit to the British Parliament her withdrawal treaty until October or November. There will then be a political crisis in Britain when she submits that and people realise what the cost of Brexit is going to be. The opinion polls show that the majority of the British people are now in favour of staying in the European Union. An overwhelming majority of young people, and of course it's their future which is most at stake in this, an overwhelming majority of young people are in favour of staying. They're increasingly demanding that their voice is heard. And my judgment as a parliamentarian is that there's at least a 50-50 chance now that we will end up holding a referendum on the Prime Minister's terms of Brexit, and my view is that if those terms are submitted to the British people, they won't agree them. That's point 1. Point 2, the Achilles heel of Brexit is the border in Ireland, because everyone says that it would be disastrous to reimpose a border in Ireland, but none of the people in favour of Brexit have an answer to the question of how you can have completely free trade and movement of people and goods between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and not have a border. As Michael says, there is no border in the world which isn't policed. Your Taoiseach went to look at the Canadian-American border last year, which has been suggested by the British government as a potential model. That border has armed police, it has vicious dogs, it has all of the apparatus of a border. Even though not everyone is stopped, doesn't mean that it isn't in every key respect a border. The third point, which is important, is that we are all in this together. Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, the rest of Britain, we are one community. We're tied by indissoluble bonds of friendship, of proximity. The troubles of the not just the last 30 years, but they go back a lot further. No one in Britain wants to see those return, and a key part of moving forward is respecting the Good Friday Agreement, which is integral to the security of Britain and to the peace of Ireland. Every leading British politician in Britain is committed to maintaining the Good Friday Agreement. We're debating at the moment in Parliament the withdrawal legislation. A key issue is the Good Friday Agreement. It seems to many of us that the best guarantee of the Good Friday Agreement is no border in Ireland and probably no Brexit. So this is all still very much a set of live issues, and we're glad to be discussing them with Irish friends and counterparts here in Dublin today.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Look, you've heard how passionately our three friends and guests speak on this topic, and they've had a range of meetings, including with my own party leader, Micheál Martin, earlier today, and with Foreign Minister Coveney. So I'll open it up to questions from the floor. Fiach.
Do you think that the only realistic way of avoiding a hard border is for the UK to remain a single market and customs union? There's no other way possible. Is that agreed by everybody at the top level? And secondly, the parliamentary arithmetic in the Commons, at least, a matter of debate often in Ireland, given that we have Sinn Féin MPs who don't take their seats in the Commons. There's often calls from Fianna Fáil and our parties for them to take their seats in the Commons to further, I suppose, balance the arithmetic towards those who will be in favour of a solution that avoids the hard border. Would the top table echo the calls from Irish politicians for Sinn Féin to take their seats in the Commons?
So on the first, we've not heard of any solution to this conundrum which is any better than the one you've suggested, which is the United Kingdom, even if it were to leave the political institutions of the European Union, would nonetheless remain part of both the customs union and the single market. And it's important to stress that, because there is some talk about the United Kingdom remaining a member of the customs union but not the single market. That would only be a partial solution at best to the border issue, because the regulatory divergence that would persist if we were to stay out of the single market would willy-nilly require border controls. On the latter, I mean, our view is, and we've been very interested in hearing about the debate about whether the 6 Sinn Féin MPs should take up their seats in the House of Commons to vote on these important issues, is that it's obviously entirely for them to decide, and we don't want to intrude into kind of political debates here in Dublin, but it would be something which would no doubt create quite a ferocious reaction amongst other people in other parties in Parliament. And so anyone who thinks that it just adds 6 votes to a growing block of anti-Brexiteer MPs, I think probably understates that you probably lose as many people as you gain.
Do you think that people in the Tory party may be inclined to vote for a softer Brexit would balk at the issue?
I think it would be incredibly difficult for any Conservative MP, but I defer to Michael on this, to vote in the same lobbies as Sinn Féin MP. So it's not something that we would recommend.
Michael.
Well, I think that Nick has covered the subject. The one thing I've learnt about politics abroad is don't interfere in the domestic conflicts and controversies of other countries. But I'm absolutely clear that the Sinn Féin arrival in Westminster would stoke memories which would not be helpful.
We can win this in the British Parliament. What's needed is time for people to understand the effects of withdrawing from the single market and the customs union. And one of the principal effects, inevitably, of withdrawing from the customs union and the single market will be the reimposition of a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. That is simply unavoidable. The only debate is what the nature of that border would be. But all those who want to see completely open, free trade between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and completely free and open movement of people should not want a border and should want Britain to stay in the customs union and the single market.
On the Sinn Féin issue.
Sorry?
The Sinn Féin issue.
Well, I think it's entirely a matter for those MPs and the party what they do, and I wouldn't dream of giving them advice.
Michael, do you
agree
have
with
one?
the other 2 contributors though it might have an opposite effect in Westminster itself?
Well, it may well do, yes, but it's a matter for them.
Anyone else? Yes.
Given that the transition deal is moving ahead this week without settling the Irish border question or any agreement on it, do you think it's the case that the EU26 are leaving Ireland behind in some way, that they've been paying lip service to this and perhaps using it as an issue to prod the UK, but they're not actually pushing for a real solution to it?
Let's take that, Michael.
I don't think there's any evidence for thinking that the EU26 are leaving Ireland behind, and indeed I would take the opposite view, that they have given the clearest possible indications in many of the larger countries that they're not going to do that. I think it would be a tragedy if there was any suggestion that Ireland could be left behind, but one of the key principles of the European position is the coherence of the European Union. And I don't think that they will allow there to be a fragmentation. There are serious issues of principle involved with the border, and so I myself don't believe there's any risk of Europe changing its position or abandoning the Republic.
A senior European Commission official said to me recently, you've got to understand that when you're talking to Ireland, you're talking to Europe. Yeah. And that is absolutely critical to this whole process of negotiations, and rightly so, because it's not in anyone's interests that this border issue isn't addressed up front before Britain leaves the European Union, because otherwise we're going to cause many, many problems for all of our nations afterwards.
Nick, do you want to add anything to that? No. Okay. Anyone else?
Can I ask for your assessment of the DUP's confidence supply deal with the minority Conservative administration at the moment, and your assessment of the impact that is having or otherwise on the Brexit negotiations?
Well, it obviously complicates things enormously because Theresa May has entered into this, what I regard as rather peculiar arrangement of writing out a cheque of whatever it is, £1 billion in return for the votes from the DUP, but also it significantly restricts her ability to act more courageously on this crucial issue of the border issue, and so it has further hemmed in the ability of the British government to act wisely and courageously for the long-term future of not only the United Kingdom but also all these issues that affect the island of Ireland. So it would seem at this great sort of historical moment where so many things are at stake, pretty peculiar that obviously here today, gone tomorrow marriage of convenience between the DUP and the Conservatives, because the Conservatives triggered and then failed to win a general election, should be the thing upon which all these great decisions hinge. At some point, Theresa May is going to have to take big decisions for the long-term future of the country, not just for the long-term future of this cobbled-together majority that she's assembled in Parliament.
But I think it's important to address your central issue, whether this is affecting the negotiations. And I don't think it is, because I think that within the Conservative Party there's obviously a divide of opinion, but a significant part of that divide would identify itself with the views of the DUP. So even without the DUP, the same issues would be of crucial importance for Mrs May and the judgment she reaches.
I think the comment I'd make is that the DUP is doing a very poor job of representing Northern Ireland, because the overwhelming majority of the citizens of Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union, but the DUP is in favour of leaving. It's also the DUP that is both in union and to have no border in Ireland. Well, those are incompatible positions. The DUP sustaining the Conservatives, because clearly they have to take a position in the House of Commons as to whether they're for or against the government. I'm much more concerned about how bad a job they're doing of representing the interests of Northern Ireland. And in particular, they're saying different things to different people. They're saying to the Conservative against the border. Well, they can't have both of those things. What's become very, very clear over the last year is if you have Brexit and leave the single market and the customs union, you must have a border. And it's very important that our friends in Northern Ireland understand that.
Hugh.
Some of the commentary here, some of the commentary in Britain has suggested that Ireland's position, driven by the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, is based on this idea of pushing for a border poll in the near future and getting a united Ireland, and that he's running scared of nationalism and Sinn Féin's growing popularity.
One of the issues that's coming into focus is, will Mrs May back a customs type union, partnership, arrangement, whatever? And the issue that stops her doing that is this concept of global Britain and this insistence on being able to form trading deals independently with unnamed countries who might be of some value. What's your own observation on all of that, and how long can she resist this question of a customs partnership being part of the solution?
Well, I think the difficulty with all these questions is that there are no answers to them. And sooner or later there has to be an answer. For me, the sort of almost the Sherlock Holmes question is the case of the missing border. Where is it going to be? how is it going to be policed? And I just am concerned it doesn't actually make the decision any easier, resolution of this whole issue that doesn't address the border. And then the other thing that I think is worth, a soft border is necessary. And some sort of process will be cobbled together, and the word technology will feature heavily in it. And so people will relax. But my political instinct, there will be an incident, major infringement, maybe drugs, it may be terrorist related, it may be military, arms related, whatever it is, they'll get to here. And therefore they will have to check the process. And they'll have to be armed. If there's an incident when they weren't armed, having been warned that this was a dangerous incursion, and that'll be the point at which the delusion of the soft border becomes a hard border.
Nick, can I just make a point very quickly about Global Britain? It's very seductive, isn't it? Very seductive, this idea. There's great cornucopia of new trade deals from Papua New Guinea to the United States waiting, and everybody's apparently queuing up to give us all the trade concessions we want, and we won't apparently, as the United Kingdom, have to give up any ourselves. It's very seductive, and it's a complete and utter illusion. I have the, I think I'm with pretty well exception in the sort of unique position of having been an EU trade negotiator in the past. And I'll tell you one thing I learnt from the years I worked as an EU trade negotiator is that the single biggest trade with each other, or how, there is a reason why Britain trades more with Ireland than it does with India, China and a number of other countries, because we're slap bang next to each other. Trade more with the United States than we will because they're right next to each other and we are not. Economists have estimated that roughly for every mile of distance that you double between two economies, you halve the amount of trade between them. And this is the fundamental falsehood of the so-called global Britain argument, is that there is no pot of gold waiting for us in the rest of the world as we forfeit the trade relationships in our own neck of the woods. It is an act of great economic folly to believe that you can replace what you lose close to home with new trade agreements further afield. There is absolutely no evidence for it whatsoever.
Andrew.
45% of Britain's trade goes to the EU. Another 15% goes to the other 75 nations with which the EU has trade agreements. All of that has to be guaranteed before you get any additional benefit at all. And as Nick says, it's a really difficult business negotiating anyway with those countries that aren't part of that 102 countries which we currently have trade with. However, what the government told us was one of those first trade treaties was apparently going to be with President Trump. President Trump 2 weeks ago imposed a 25% tariff on British steel exports. The government was powerless to stop it. If it can't stop a 25% tariff on British steel, what chances are there of reaching a trade agreement with the United States next year? It is pure moonshine, and the British people are increasingly realising that, and that all of those arguments made, we have more trade with Ireland than we have with India, and as they see these facts, and we're pragmatic, as Napoleon said, we're a nation of shopkeepers, as they see that their livelihood is being sold down the river, I think that's going to contribute to this crisis in the autumn when Mrs May presents her withdrawal treaty to Parliament.
Michael. Anyone else?
Yeah. I think Michael has already answered this question for Nick and Andrew. Given that the backstop has sort of been rejected outright by Theresa May, the EU says this is the way forward, we're going to get to a crunch point. How do you see it unfolding then? I mean,
well, there's going to be a collision, isn't there? Exactly. There's a collision between the logical consequences of Theresa May's own interpretation of Brexit. In other words, the interpretation that she has chosen to impose upon the referendum result is a particularly uncompromising one, where we not only leave the European Union but leave the single market and the customs union. That has, as we've already explained, inevitable, as night follows day, consequences in terms of border checks, and the commitment that she's equally entered into, that there will be a legally binding backstop arrangement in the absence of any other solution, which will lead to full realignment, regulatory realignment between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Those two are mutually, they're just mutually inconsistent, so they will collide. And I think I think what Michael, Andrew, and I have sort of understood more clearly after our meetings today is that whilst this collision has for the moment been deferred following the announcement from Michel Barnier and David Davis, it hasn't remotely gone away, and June looks like it will be a vital, if not the most pivotal month in these Brexit negotiations, because at that point, assuming, as we safely assume, the EU will remain very, very supportive position, there will be a head-to-head collision. In our view, in the end, that collision will either lead to a collapse in the talks or to an acknowledgement by Theresa May that she's got it wrong and that the United Kingdom will need to stay in the customs union and the single market.
Michael Dorey said, what do you think will happen? Will the talks collapse? Will it be a soft border?
Well, so far the pattern, in as much as history is a guide to the future, so far the pattern is that this government walks its troops up the mountain, claiming it's not going to spend any money, and then saying actually it's going to spend billions of pounds for years to come, saying that it's going to be tough to give its fishing community. Is lots of brave, rather foolhardy talk from the British Brexit negotiators, followed by serial humiliation. And in the absence of any other evidence, I strongly suspect that will happen big time all over again on this issue.
Just one more question, because we're under pressure for time. Anyone else?
Yeah. Border solution here. And does Brexit then, I suppose maybe all three gentlemen could address, does Brexit actually bring a border poll closer in the future?
The borderless solution is for Britain to stay in the European Union. Let's be clear, and that's what we're all aiming for, and that's absolutely achievable. The House of Lords, in which I sit, we spent a whole day last week debating the Good Friday Agreement, and this absolute determination that nothing should be done to imperil the Good Friday Agreement. I think it's very likely that the Good Friday Agreement will be made in British law an absolute requirement in respect of the withdrawal treaty. I'd be astonished if the House of Lords doesn't vote for that. I think there's a good chance that the House of Commons will back that. Now, my own view, having listened to the arguments on this over now many months, is that the Good Friday Agreement is incompatible with either a border in Ireland or therefore anything more than marginal divergence